The fluorescent lights in the waiting room buzzed like dying insects. I sat in the corner chair, my right arm cradled against my chest, wrapped in a dish towel that had turned rust brown where the swelling pushed against the makeshift splint. The pain had stopped being sharp around hour 6. Now it was just a dull, grinding throb that made my vision blur at the edges every time I shifted my weight. The receptionist hadn't looked at me when I walked in. She'd looked at the card I'd been told to present, a thick black rectangle with gold embossing that caught the light like a warning. Her face had gone pale. She'd picked up the phone without asking my name. I didn't belong here. The marble floors were polished to a mirror shine. The chairs were upholstered in buttersoft leather that probably cost more than my monthly rent. A fountain burbled in the corner, the sound designed to be calming, but it only made me need to pee. I hadn't eaten in 14 hours. My uniform, a faded gray polo shirt and black pants, smelled like the bus I'd taken to get here and the fierce sweat that had soaked through the fabric. The door at the far end of the room opened. Not the door I'd entered through, but a different one, hidden in the paneling. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that moved like water. He didn't look at me. He looked at the receptionist and nodded once. She stood up so fast her chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "Miss Reyes," she said, her voice too high. "You can go in now." I stood up. My knees felt like they were filled with sand. The man in the suit held the door open, his face blank, his eyes scanning me the way airport security scans luggage. I walked past him into a hallway that smelled like leather and something sharper. Antiseptic, maybe, or expensive cologne. The door closed behind me with a soft click that sounded final. The hallway ended in another door. This one was heavy, dark wood with a brass handle. The man in the suit knocked twice, paused, then opened it without waiting for a response. He stepped aside and gestured for me to enter. The room beyond was not what I expected. I'd been bracing for an examination table, medical equipment, maybe a doctor in a white coat. Instead, I walked into an office. A massive desk dominated the center, made of wood so dark it looked black. Behind it sat a man I recognized from photographs I'd never been supposed to see, Vincent Corrigan. The name was whispered in the neighborhoods where I worked, always with a specific kind of reverence mixed with fear. He owned the buildings, the businesses, the silence. He was the reason certain people disappeared and others stayed safe. He was not a man you met by accident. He looked up from the file open in front of him. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds, and they fixed on me with the kind of focus that made my breath catch. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just looked. "Sit down, Miss Reyes," he said. His voice was quiet, controlled, the kind of voice that didn't need to be raised to be obeyed. I sat in the chair across from his desk. The leather was cold through my thin pants. I kept my broken arm close to my body, trying not to let it show how much it hurt. He watched me settle, his gaze dropping briefly to the dish towel, then back to my face. "How long has it been broken?" he asked. 3 days, I said. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. 3 days. He repeated it like he was testing the weight of the words. "And you went to work anyway?" It wasn't a question, but I nodded. "Why?" I didn't know how to answer that. Because I needed the money. Because I couldn't afford to lose the job. Because leaving would have meant abandoning a child who needed someone to stay. I settled on the simplest truth. Because there was no one else. Vincent Corrigan closed the file. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. I wanted to look away, but something told me that would be a mistake. So I held his gaze and waited. "My son broke your arm," he said finally. The words hung in the air between us. I felt my stomach drop. I'd known this conversation was coming. Had known it from the moment I'd received the black card with the address and the time. But hearing it said out loud in that quiet, controlled voice made it real in a way I hadn't been prepared for. "It was an accident," I said quickly. "Was it?" Not a question. A statement. I swallowed hard. He didn't mean to hurt me. He was upset. He grabbed my arm and twisted it until the bone snapped. Vincent's voice didn't rise, but something in it sharpened. I've read the security footage analysis. I know exactly how much force was required. My son is 10 years old and he broke an adult woman's arm during what the staff described as one of his episodes. I didn't know what to say to that. The truth was ugly and complicated. Yes, Marcus had hurt me. Yes, it had been terrifying in the moment. The sudden explosion of rage, the strength that seemed impossible for a child his size, the sound my own bone made as it gave way. But I'd also seen the look on his face afterward. The horror. The guilt. The way he'd retreated into himself so completely I wasn't sure he'd ever come back out. He's not a bad kid, I said quietly. Vincent's expression didn't change. That's not what I asked you. You didn't ask me anything. The words were out before I could stop them. I watched Vincent's eyebrow rise a fraction of an inch. For a moment I thought I'd made a terrible mistake. Then something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. Gone so quickly I might have imagined it. No, he agreed. I didn't. Let me be clear then. Why didn't you report the injury? I looked down at my wrapped arm. The dish towel had started to come loose. I could see the purple-black bruising spreading from beneath the fabric, ugly and swollen. I thought about the truth. The real truth, not the version I'd told myself to make it easier. Because reporting it would have made it worse, I said. Worse for whom? For Marcus. I looked back up at Vincent. He already thinks he's broken. Dangerous. He hears people talk about him like he's a problem that needs to be solved. If I'd reported this, it would have been more proof that they're right. More evidence that he's... I stopped myself. That he's what? That he's like you. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and erratic. Crossed a line. I knew I'd crossed a line. But I was too tired and in too much pain to take it back. Vincent stood up. He walked around the desk with deliberate slowness. His movements precise and controlled. He stopped a few feet away from me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. And what do you think I am, Miss Reyes? I should have apologized. I should have backtracked, softened my words, made myself smaller. But something in his voice told me he didn't want that. He wanted honesty, even if it was cut. I think you're someone who scares people into compliance, I said carefully. I think you've built a world where fear is currency. And I think your son is terrified he's inherited that from you. Vincent looked at me for a long moment. Then he did something I didn't expect. He sat down in the chair next to mine, not behind his desk but beside me, close enough that I could smell the subtle scent of his cologne, sandalwood and something darker. My son broke your arm 3 days ago, he said quietly. You hid the injury. You continued working. You protected him from consequences. Why? Because consequences without understanding just create more damage, I said. He didn't need punishment. He needed someone to stay. Vincent was quiet. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Not softer exactly but less guarded. No one has ever stayed. Vincent stood up and walked back to his desk. He pressed a button on the phone. Send Dr. Rashid in. The door opened almost immediately. A woman in her 50s entered, wearing scrubs and carrying a medical bag. She looked at me with professional concern, then at Vincent with something that might have been disapproval. 3 days, she said flatly. I'm aware, Vincent replied. Doctor. Rashid knelt beside my chair and began carefully unwrapping the dish towel. I bit down on the inside of my cheek to keep from making a sound as she examined the break. Her touch was gentle, but even gentle hurt. You need surgery, she said after a moment. The bone's displaced. If we don't set it properly, you'll lose significant function. And there's infection risk. This makeshift splint has been compromising circulation. I'll handle the arrangements, Vincent said. Private suite. Everything she needs. I can't afford. I started. That wasn't a question. Dr. Rashid looked between us, then focused on me. "Can you stand?" He nodded. She helped me to my feet, supporting my good arm. Vincent moved to the door, opening it himself rather than calling for the guard. He led us down a different hallway, this one carpeted and quiet. We passed closed doors, turned corners, eventually reached an elevator that required a keycard to operate. The elevator rose smoothly. I watched the numbers climb, 15, 16, 17. When the doors opened, we stepped into what looked less like a hospital wing and more like a luxury hotel. The nurse's station was marble. The floors were hardwood. Through an open door, I glimpsed a room with a king-sized bed and floor-to-ceiling windows. "This is where you'll recover," Vincent said. "Dr. Rashid will perform the surgery tonight. You'll stay here until you're fully healed." "That could be weeks," I said. "I'm aware. Have a job. Have rent." "I have. You have a broken arm that my son caused." Vincent's voice remained level. "Your job has been notified you're taking medical leave. Your rent has been handled. Your belongings are being moved to storage. You're staying here." I felt the room tilt slightly. "You already did all that." Before I even agreed. Vincent looked at me with those storm-gray eyes. "Miss Reyes, you were never going to refuse. We both know that." He was right. I had nowhere else to go. No insurance, no savings, no safety net. But what unsettled me more than the assumption was the fact that he'd already known enough about my life to make it. The rent, the job, the belongings. He'd known all of it. "How long have you been watching me?" I asked quietly. Vincent's expression didn't change. "Longer than you think." The surgery happened that night. Dr. Rashid was efficient and professional, explaining everything she was going to do in calm, measured terms. I was given anesthesia that made the world go soft and blurry. The last thing I remembered was staring at the ceiling tiles and wondering how many other people had lain in this room, caught in Vincent Corrigan's orbit against their will. When I woke, my arm was in a proper cast, elevated on pillows. The pain was still there but muted, manageable with whatever medication was running through the fore in my other arm. Sunlight streamed through the windows. I'd lost an entire night that a nurse I didn't recognize was checking my vitals. She smiled when she saw me awake. "Good morning. How's the pain?" "Tolerable," I said. My mouth tasted like metal. "Dr. Rashid will be in to see you this afternoon. For now you should rest. There's food in the warmer if you're hungry. The bathroom is through that door. If you need anything, use the call button." She left before I could ask any of the 100 questions crowding my mind. I lay there for a while, trying to make sense of what had happened. 3 days ago, I'd been a nanny with a broken arm and no options. Now I was in a private medical suite, being treated by a surgeon who probably charged more per hour than I made in a month. All because Vincent Corrigan had decided I mattered. But why did I matter? That was the question that wouldn't leave me alone. I managed to sit up, moving carefully to avoid jostling the cast. The room was beautiful in an impersonal way. Expensive furniture, neutral colors, everything positioned for maximum efficiency. There was a dresser against one wall. I opened the top drawer and found clothes. Not my clothes. New clothes, still with tags attached, all in my size. Someone had measured me. Someone had shopped for me. Someone had made decisions about what I would wear while I recovered in this gilded cage. I walked to the window, moving slowly, my legs unsteady from the anesthesia. The view showed the city spread out below, buildings stacked like children's blocks, streets forming a grid that seemed impossibly orderly from this height. I was so high up that the people on the sidewalks looked like ants. The door opened behind me. I turned, expecting Dr. Rashid or another nurse. Instead, Vincent Corrigan walked in. He was wearing different clothes, a dark sweater and slacks, more casual than the suit from yesterday but still expensive. He looked at me standing by the window and frowned slightly. "You should be resting." "I've been resting for 14 hours, I said. Dr. Rashid specifically instructed. "I'm fine." I wasn't really. My head felt fuzzy and my arm throbbed despite the medication. But I didn't want to be horizontal and vulnerable while he was in the room. Vincent studied me for a moment, then nodded. Sit down. We need to talk. I sat in the chair by the window. Vincent remained standing, which meant I had to look up at him. I wondered if that was deliberate, the height difference, the power dynamic. Probably. Your landlord filed an eviction notice 2 weeks ago, Vincent said without preamble. You were 30 days behind on rent. The building where you worked received multiple complaints about your absence. Your bank account has been overdrawn for 6 days. You have no family in the city. No emergency contacts. No safety net of any kind. Each fact landed like a stone. I wanted to argue to defend myself, but everything he said was true. I'd been one bad day away from homelessness for months. The broken arm had just been the thing that finally pushed me over the edge. How do you know all that? I asked. Because I make it my business to know. Since when? Vincent walked to the other chair and sat down, close enough that our knees almost touched. Since 3 months ago, when my head of security flagged you as a potential risk factor. Blinked. A risk factor. I'm a nanny. I read stories and make sandwiches. What risk could I possibly be? You're not just a nanny, Miss Reyes. You're someone my son trusts. That gives you leverage. It makes you valuable to people who want to get to me through him. And it means I need to know exactly who you are. The words settled over me like cold water. Been watching. Investigated. Says. For 3 months, every move I'd made had been catalogued by someone in Vincent Corrigan's organization. The thought made my skin crawl. So you knew about the eviction, I said slowly. You knew I was desperate. And you let it happen anyway. I didn't let anything happen, Vincent corrected. I was waiting to see how you'd handle it. Whether you'd run. Whether you'd steal. Whether you'd use Marcus as leverage to negotiate a better position. But I didn't do any of that. Well, you hit a broken arm and kept working because you didn't want to leave a child alone. Vincent's expression was unreadable. That's why you're here. Not because of the injury. Because of what you chose to do afterward. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This isn't about helping me recover. This is about controlling me. This is about protecting my son, Vincent said quietly. You've proven you're loyal to him. I need to ensure that loyalty can't be bought or threatened by anyone else. Dr. Rashid came by in the afternoon as promised. She examined the cast, asked about my pain levels, and adjusted my medication. She was kind but distant, the way medical professionals are when they know their patient isn't really a patient, just another piece in someone else's game. After she left, a different nurse brought lunch. Real food, not hospital cafeteria fare. Grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, bread that was still warm. I ate mechanically, tasting nothing. I was a prisoner. A comfortable, well-fed prisoner with excellent medical care. But a prisoner nonetheless. The door wasn't locked. I could probably leave if I wanted to. But leave to go where? My apartment was gone. My savings were gone. I had no job and no way to pay for the surgery I just received. Vincent had been right about one thing. I was never going to refuse. He'd known that before I walked into his office. Hell, he'd probably known it 3 months ago when his security team first started watching me. The afternoon passed slowly. I watched the city change as the sun moved across the sky, shadows lengthening between buildings. I tried to read. Someone had left a stack of books on the nightstand, but couldn't focus on the words. My mind kept circling back to the same questions. Why had Marcus hurt me? I'd been his nanny for 8 months. We'd developed a routine, a relationship. He'd seemed to trust me. But something had triggered that explosion of rage, and I still didn't know what. The staff had called it one of his episodes. Like violence was a weather pattern that moved through him periodically, predictable but uncontrollable. I'd worked with difficult children before. Kids who screamed, who threw things, who tested every boundary. But Marcus was different. His anger wasn't chaos. It was something colder, more calculated. When he'd grabbed my arm, when he'd twisted until something gave way, there'd been a moment, just a split second, where I'd seen something in his eyes that terrified me. He'd looked exactly like his father. On the third day, Vincent brought Marcus to see me. I heard voices in the hallway first, Vincent's low rumble and a child's higher pitch, resistant and afraid. The door opened. Marcus stood in the doorway, Vincent's hand on his shoulder, looking like he was being marched to his own execution. "Say what we discussed," Vincent said quietly. Marcus's eyes found mine, then skittered away. He looked smaller than I remembered, his shoulders hunched, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He had his father's dark hair and the same sharp cheekbones, but his eyes were different, brown instead of gray, and full of something that looked like shame. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry I hurt you." The apology was clearly rehearsed. Vincent had probably made him practice it a dozen times. But there was something genuine in the way Marcus couldn't look at me while he said it, in the way his voice cracked on the last word. "It's okay," I said. "No." Vincent's voice cut through the room. "It's not okay. Marcus needs to understand that actions have consequences. What he did to you was not acceptable. It will never be acceptable." Marcus flinched. I saw his hands curl into fists inside his pockets. The tension in his small body was visible, coiled tight like a spring about to snap. "Can I talk to him alone?" I asked Vincent. Vincent looked at me, his expression unreadable. For a moment I thought he'd refuse. Then he nodded once and stepped out of the room, closing the door behind him. Marcus and I stared at each other. He looked terrified. "I didn't mean to," he said finally. "I didn't mean to break your arm. I know. Everyone thinks I'm like him." His voice was barely audible. "They think I'm going to be like him. Your father." Marcus nodded. A tear slid down his cheek, quick and angry. He wiped it away with the back of his hand. "He's not a bad person," I said carefully. He's scary." Marcus's voice gained strength. "Everyone's scared of him. And they're starting to be scared of me too. The other tutors quit. The housekeeper won't come near me. Even Dr. Rashid looks at me like I'm going to explode." I thought about my own broken arm, about the force it had taken to snap the bone. I should have been scared of him. Maybe I was, a little. But more than that, I saw a child who was drowning in fear, not of others but of himself. "Come here," I said. Marcus hesitated, then walked slowly to my bedside. He stopped a few feet away, maintaining distance like he thought he might hurt me again if he got too close. "Sit," I said, patting the edge of the bed. He sat carefully, his body rigid. I shifted so I could see him better, wincing as the movement pulled at my cast. "You want to know what I think?" I asked. Marcus didn't answer, but he was listening. "I think you're 10 years old and you've been given way too much to carry. I think the adults in your life have made you feel responsible for things that aren't your fault. And I think you're so scared of becoming someone you're not that you can't see who you actually are. What if I'm already him?" Marcus's voice was small. "What if it's too late?" "It's not." I reached out with my good hand and touched his shoulder. He didn't pull away. "You broke my arm, Marcus." "That's true. But you know what else is true? The second it happened you were horrified. You tried to help. You apologized over and over. That's not who your father is. That's who you are." "Dad never apologizes," Marcus said quietly. "Well, he doesn't. But you do. That's the difference." We sat in silence for a while. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Marcus's shoulders began to relax. The coiled tension in his body loosened. "Are you going to leave?" he asked finally. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Your father says I'm staying here until I'm healed." After that, I shrugged with my good shoulder. "I don't know. I don't want you to leave." The words were said so quietly I almost missed them. I looked at Marcus and saw a child who'd been abandoned by everyone who was supposed to stay. Tutors, nannies, probably his mother, though no one had mentioned her. All the people who should have been constants in his life had proven temporary. "I'm not leaving yet," I said. It was the best promise I could make. Marcus nodded. He stood up, walking back toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "Can I come back tomorrow?" he asked. "Yes." He left. Through the closed door, I heard Vincent's voice, low and questioning. I couldn't make out the words, but I heard Marcus's response clearly. "She's not scared of me." Vincent didn't come back that day, but Marcus did the next morning. He arrived with a book tucked under his arm and the same hesitant expression he'd worn before. This time he didn't wait for permission. He sat in the chair by the window and opened the book. "I thought maybe you were bored," he said. "So I brought this. It's about space. Stars and planets and black holes and stuff. You like astronomy?" I asked. He nodded. "It's big. Too big to be scared of." I understood that completely. Sometimes the only way to handle the fear in your own life was to contemplate something so vast it made your problems feel microscopic. Marcus started reading aloud. He was good at it. His voice steady, his pronunciation careful. I listened and watched the way sunlight caught in his dark hair, the way his fingers traced the words on the page. He looked nothing like the child who'd broken my arm. He looked exactly like what he was. A lonely kid trying to connect the only way he knew how. When he finished the chapter, he closed the book and looked at me. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why didn't you tell my dad what I said before I hurt you?" I had a pretty good idea what he was referring to, but I wanted to hear him say it. "What did you say?" Marcus looked down at his hands. "I said I wished you weren't here. I said I wished everyone would just leave me alone. I said..." He stopped, his voice catching. "I said I hated you. And 5 minutes later you grabbed my arm," I finished quietly. He nodded, tears forming in his eyes again. "I didn't tell your father because I knew you didn't mean it," I said. "You were angry and overwhelmed, and those feelings had to go somewhere. They came out as words first, then as action. But the words weren't the truth. They were just pain looking for an exit." "How do you know?" "Because I've felt that way too." Marcus looked up at me, surprised. "You have. Everyone has. The difference is, most adults have learned how to let the pain out without hurting people. You're still learning. That's okay." "Dad never learned," Marcus said quietly. I didn't know how to respond to that. Vincent Corrigan was not a man who let pain show. He'd weaponized it instead, turned it into power. I wondered what had happened to make him that way. I wondered if Marcus was watching his father's pattern and assuming it was inevitable. "Your dad is one version of how a person can be," I said carefully. "But he's not the only version. You get to choose." The days developed a pattern. Marcus would visit in the mornings and afternoons, sometimes reading, sometimes just sitting quietly. Vincent would appear in the evenings, asking brief questions about my recovery, observing Marcus and me with an intensity that felt like being studied under a microscope. Dr. Rashid came every other day to check my progress. The bone was healing well, she said. I'd need physical therapy once the cast came off, but she expected I'd regain full function. The infection risk had passed. Everything was proceeding according to plan. A week into my stay, a woman arrived with clothing racks and measuring tape. She introduced herself as Sophia, a personal stylist. She measured me efficiently, asked about my preferences, and left with pages of notes. 2 days later, the dresser was full of clothes that actually fit, in colors I liked, in styles that made me feel less like a charity case and more like a person. I should have been grateful. I should have felt lucky. Instead, I felt like a doll being dressed and positioned and moved around at someone else's whim. On day 10, I asked Vincent directly. He'd come by after dinner. His usual quiet assessment. I waited until he was about to leave. "Why are you doing all this?" asked. He paused at the door. "You already know why. Because I'm leveraged. Because I matter to Marcus. Because you need to control the variables." I stood up from the chair, steadying myself on the armrest. "But that's not all of it, is it?" Vincent turned to face me fully. In the evening light, his gray eyes looked almost silver. "What do you think the rest of it is?" "I think you see something in me that you recognize," I said slowly, working through the thought as I spoke. Something that reminds you of someone. Or something you wish you'd been. Is that what you think? Am I wrong? Vincent was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. My son has been through 4 nannies in 2 years. 3 quit within the first month. The 4th lasted 6 months before she filed a restraining order. You lasted 8. You hit a broken arm rather than leave. That suggests either stupidity or loyalty. You don't strike me as stupid. So I'm loyal. That still doesn't explain why you're keeping me here like some kind of... I gestured at the expensive room, the clothes, the careful monitoring. Like some kind of prized possession. You're not a possession, Vincent said quietly. You're a constant. Marcus needs those. He needs to know someone will stay even when it's hard. Even when it hurts. You've proven you will. I'm simply ensuring no one can take that away from him. Physical therapy started on day 14. A man named James came to the room with resistance bands and a list of exercises designed to restore mobility to my arm. The work was painful, frustrating, and exhausting. James was patient but unyielding, pushing me to do 1 more repetition, hold the stretch 5 more seconds, and tolerate the discomfort for the sake of long-term function. Marcus watched sometimes, sitting quietly in the corner. He seemed fascinated by the process, the way damaged things could be slowly rebuilt through repeated effort. I wondered if he was drawing parallels to himself. Does it hurt? He asked one day after James had left and I was icing my arm. Yes, I said honestly. But it's a different kind of hurt. It's the kind that means I'm getting better, not worse. Marcus absorbed this. Like when you pull out a splinter. Exactly like that. He was quiet for a moment, then said, I've been seeing Dr. Morrison 3 times a week. Dr. Morrison was Marcus's therapist. I'd heard the name mentioned but never met him. How's that going? I asked. He wants me to talk about my mom. Marcus's voice went flat. But I don't remember her. Not really. She left when I was 4. I have this one memory of her singing, but I don't know if it's real or if I made it up. Waited. Experience had taught me that sometimes the best thing to do was simply create space for someone to fill with their own words. Dr. Morrison says I have abandonment issues, Marcus continued. He says that's why I push people away before they can leave. He says I hurt you because I was testing whether you'd abandon me like everyone else. What do you think? I asked. Marcus looked at me with eyes that were far too old for a 10-year-old. I think he's right. And I think that makes me exactly like my dad. Because Dad pushes everyone away too. He just does it differently. How does he do it? He makes people scared. So scared they never get close enough to leave. If you can't get close, you can't leave. It's smart, really. Marcus's voice was matter-of-fact, analytical. He could have been describing a science experiment. But lonely, I said quietly. Marcus nodded. Yeah, really lonely. We sat together in the silence that followed. Through the window, the city glittered in the afternoon sun. Somewhere down there, people were living normal lives, going to work, picking up groceries, arguing about parking spaces. Small, ordinary, safe lives. I'd never wanted ordinary so badly. Can I tell you something? Marcus asked. Always. I'm glad I hurt you. The words landed like a punch. I must have looked shocked because Marcus quickly backtracked, his face flushing. No, I mean, I'm not glad. That came out wrong. I mean... He struggled to find the words. If I hadn't hurt you, Dad wouldn't have brought you here. And if you weren't here, I'd still be alone. So I'm glad you're here. Even though the reason is bad. I understood what he was trying to say. Sometimes the worst moments led to necessary changes. Sometimes breaking was the only way to be fixed. Vincent requested my presence at dinner on day 17. It wasn't an invitation so much as a summons, delivered by one of his security team with the same quiet efficiency that characterized everything in his world. I dressed carefully, choosing simple black pants and a cream sweater from the collection Sophia had provided. My cast was now covered in a more discreet sleeve that made it less obvious. I looked almost normal. Almost like someone who belonged at Vincent Corrigan's table. The dining room was on a different floor. The security guard, I'd learned his name was Thomas, escorted me down in the private elevator. The space was formal but not cold. A long table, dark wood set for 3. Tall windows overlooking the city. Art on the walls that probably cost more than I'd earn in a lifetime. Marcus was already seated, wearing a button-down shirt and looking uncomfortable. When I entered, his face lit up. "You're here. Dad said you might not come." "Why wouldn't I come?" I asked, taking the seat across from him. "Because people usually don't want to have dinner with us," Marcus said simply. "It's too formal. And Dad doesn't talk much. And I'm..." He stopped himself. "You're what?" "Nothing." Vincent entered before I could push the question further. He'd changed clothes too, slacks and a dark sweater that made his gray eyes even more striking. He looked at the two of us, something unreadable crossing his face, then took his seat at the head of the table. Staff appeared with food. The meal was Italian. Pasta, salad, bread still warm from the oven. The kind of food that required attention and care to prepare. We ate in relative silence for several minutes before Vincent spoke. "Dr. Rashid says you're healing ahead of schedule." "Yes," I confirmed. "Physical therapy going well." "It's difficult but productive." "Good." He cut into his pasta with precision. "We'll need to discuss your next steps soon." My stomach tightened. "Next steps. Once you're cleared medically, you'll need to make some decisions about your future." Vincent's tone was neutral, but I heard the weight behind it. "Whether you return to your previous employment situation. Whether you pursue other opportunities. Whether," he paused, "whether you'd prefer to stay." The last option hung in the air like a question that wasn't quite a question. "Stay how?" I asked carefully. "In a more permanent capacity. Marcus needs consistency. You've provided that. I'm prepared to offer you a formal position. Head of household staff, live-in, with a comprehensive benefits package and security guarantees." "You want to hire me to run your household?" "I want to hire you to be someone Marcus can rely on," Vincent corrected. "The household management is secondary." I looked at Marcus. He was staring at his plate, his shoulders tense, clearly trying not to show how much he cared about my answer. "Can I think about it?" I asked. "Of course." Vincent returned to his meal. "Take whatever time you need." After dinner, Marcus walked me back to my room. Thomas followed at a discreet distance, professional and invisible. Marcus was quiet, his hands shoved in his pockets, his expression guarded. "You're going to say no," he said when we reached my door. "I didn't say that." "You didn't say yes." I unlocked the door but didn't go in. Instead, I crouched down so I was eye level with Marcus. The movement pulled at my healing arm, but I ignored the discomfort. "I need to think about it because it's a big decision," I said gently. "It's not about you. It's about making sure I can do what your father is asking me to do. Because if I say yes, I have to really mean it. I can't leave after 6 months or a year when it gets hard. Do you understand?" Marcus looked at me with those two old eyes. "It's always hard. That's the point. Nobody stays when it's hard. I stayed when you broke my arm. That was different." "How?" "Because..." He struggled to articulate it. "Because you didn't have a choice then. Now you do. And when people have a choice, they choose to leave." The words were so matter-of-fact, so resigned, that I felt something crack in my chest. This child had been taught that abandonment was inevitable, that care was conditional, that love, if it existed at all, always had an expiration date. What if I chose to stay? I asked quietly. Marcus's eyes widened slightly. "You'd really do that?" "I'm thinking about it." He threw his arms around my neck so quickly I didn't have time to brace. The impact sent a jolt of pain through my arm, but I didn't pull away. I hugged him back with my good arm, feeling him shake against me. "Please don't go," he whispered. "Please." I held him until the shaking stopped. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were red but dry. He'd learned not to cry. Another lesson he shouldn't have had to learn so young. "I'll give you my answer tomorrow," I promised. Marcus nodded and left, Thomas shadowing him down the hallway. I went into my room and closed the door, leaning against it until I heard their footsteps fade. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. Lights were coming on as evening settled in, thousands of windows glowing against the darkening sky. Somewhere out there was the life I'd lost, the shabby apartment, the overdue bills, the constant fear of not having enough. I'd been miserable, but at least I'd been free. Now I had a choice. Accept Vincent's offer and become part of his world permanently, or walk away and try to rebuild what I'd had before. The choice should have been obvious. One path offered security, stability, purpose. The other offered only struggle. But the struggle was familiar. Safety, especially safety provided by someone like Vincent Corrigan, came with strings I couldn't fully see. I thought about Marcus's small voice asking me not to leave. I thought about his father's careful offer, framed as employment but clearly something more complicated. I thought about the last 3 weeks, the surveillance, the control, the way Vincent had seamlessly absorbed me into his orbit without ever asking if that's what I wanted. And I thought about the fact that, despite everything, I didn't hate it here. I didn't hate the routine I'd built with Marcus, the quiet conversations with Vincent, even the physical therapy sessions that left me exhausted. I'd felt more purposeful in 3 weeks than I had in 3 years. Maybe that made me complicit. Maybe that made me weak. Or maybe it just made me human. Someone who'd been drowning for so long that even a gilded cage felt like solid ground. I told Vincent yes the next morning. He received the news with a single nod, as if he'd never doubted my answer. Maybe he hadn't. Maybe he'd known from the moment I walked into his office that I'd end up here, accepting his terms, becoming part of the machinery that kept his world running. The transition happened quickly. My few remaining belongings, the ones that had been in storage, were delivered. I was given a permanent room on a different floor, larger than the medical suite, with a sitting area and a small office space. The cast came off 2 days later, replaced with a removable brace I'd wear for another month. Marcus was delighted. He showed me around the penthouse like it was his personal kingdom, pointing out hidden passages, secret elevator access points, and the best places to hide when the cleaners came through. The place was massive, 3 floors connected by internal stairs, walls of glass, furniture that looked sculpted rather than built. "This is Dad's study," Marcus said, stopping at a heavy door near the end of one hallway. "We're not supposed to go in without permission. But you do anyway." Marcus grinned, looking more like a normal 10-year-old than I'd ever seen him. "Sometimes, when he's gone, he has all these books about psychology and philosophy and war strategy. It's actually kind of interesting." "He knows you go in there," I said. "Yeah, probably. But he doesn't say anything, so I figure it's okay." I was starting to understand how Vincent's household worked. Everything was observed, catalogued, filed away for future reference. But not everything was confronted. Some transgressions were allowed because they provided information. Others were crushed immediately to establish boundaries. The trick was figuring out which was which. I met the rest of the staff over the next few days. Maria, who handled the actual cooking and cleaning. Robert, who managed security logistics and answered directly to Vincent. Dr. Morrison, Marcus's therapist, who came 3 times a week and seemed genuinely invested in Marcus's progress. And a rotating cast of others. Drivers, bodyguards, occasional specialists who came in for specific tasks. Everyone treated me with professional courtesy and barely concealed curiosity. I was an unknown variable in a system that valued predictability. The nanny who'd been promoted. The woman Vincent Corrigan had personally inserted into his inner circle. Nobody quite knew what to make of me. I didn't know what to make of myself. The first crisis came on day 6 of my new position. Marcus had a session with Dr. Morrison that didn't go well. I wasn't there for it, but I heard the aftermath. Raised voices, something breaking, Maria's worried voice on the phone asking where Vincent was. I found Marcus in his room, sitting on the floor with his back against the bed, knees drawn up to his chest. His hands were bleeding. He'd punched the bathroom mirror, apparently. Shards of glass glittered on the tile floor. "Don't," he said when he saw me. "Don't try to fix it." I sat down next to him, careful not to crowd him. "I'm not going to try to fix anything. I'm just going to sit here." He wants me to talk about her. Dr. Morrison. He keeps pushing and pushing and I don't remember. I don't remember her face or her voice or anything real. Just this feeling. This empty feeling where she's supposed to be. That must be hard. Everyone has a mom. Even if they're dead or gone or whatever. Everyone has memories. Have nothing. Just this hole. I looked at his bleeding hands. "We should clean those up." I said, "Don't try to fix it." "I'm not trying to fix your emotions, Marcus. I'm trying to prevent infection. There's a difference." He let me lead him to the bathroom. I picked the glass out of his knuckles with tweezers, cleaned the cuts with antiseptic, wrapped his hands in gauze. He didn't cry. He barely flinched. The physical pain was nothing compared to the other kind. "She left because of me," he said finally. "I know everyone says it wasn't my fault, but it was. Something about me made her leave. Something wrong. Or something about her made her unable to stay," I countered gently. "Marcus, you were 4 years old. 4-year-olds don't drive parents away. Adults make adult choices for adult reasons. Whatever happened with your mother, it wasn't because of anything you did or didn't do. Then why does it feel like it was? Because that's what children do. We make everything about ourselves. We think we're the center of the universe, so when something goes wrong, it must be our fault. But the universe is bigger than that. And people leave for reasons that have nothing to do with the people they leave behind." Marcus looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Is that what happened to you? Someone left." "Several someones," I admitted. "My father. My grandmother. My best friend in college. People leave. Hurt. But it's not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of their capacity." Vincent came home an hour later. Robert must have called him because he went straight to Marcus's room. I was in the hallway when I heard his voice, quiet but intense, asking what happened. Marcus's response was too low for me to make out. The door opened. Vincent stepped out and saw me standing there. "You stayed with him?" "Of course. The mirror. Broken. He'll need new gauze tomorrow. The cuts aren't deep." Vincent studied me for a long moment. "Come with me." I followed him to his study. The room was exactly as Marcus had described. Walls of books, a massive desk, leather furniture. It smelled like paper and wood polish and something darker. Power maybe. Control. Vincent closed the door and stood with his back to it, arms crossed. "Dr. Morrison called me," he said. "He told me Marcus became violent during their session. That he refuses to discuss his mother and seems to be regressing rather than progressing." "Marcus doesn't remember his mother," I said. "Dr. Morrison is trying to make him excavate memories that don't exist. It's not regression. It's resistance to therapy that isn't helping. You think you know better than a licensed psychologist. I think I know Marcus." I met Vincent's gray stare without flinching. "He doesn't need to remember his mother. He needs to grieve what he never had. Those are different processes. And Dr. Morrison is too focused on the former to recognize the latter." Vincent was quiet. When he spoke, his voice was measured. "You've been here less than a month. I was his nanny for 8 months before that. I've spent more time with Marcus than almost anyone else in his life. I know what helps him and what doesn't. And breaking mirrors helps. Well, but neither does forced therapy sessions that make him feel defective for not having a perfect recall of his early childhood. He punched the mirror because he felt trapped. Because someone was demanding something from him he couldn't give." Vincent walked to his desk and poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter. "He didn't offer me one. What would you suggest instead?" "Different therapy. Someone who specializes in attachment issues and childhood trauma." Someone who understands that healing isn't about recovering the past. It's about building a functional present. You have someone in mind. I did actually. During my years working with difficult children, I'd met several therapists who understood trauma. Dr. Sarah Chen. She works primarily with adopted children and kids in foster care. She's excellent with attachment disorders. Vincent pulled out his phone and made a note. I'll have Robert vet her. She'll pass any vetting. She's legitimate. Nevertheless, Vincent took a sip of his drink. Why do you care this much? Because Marcus is a child who deserves better than he's getting. He has everything he needs. He has everything money can buy, I corrected. That's not the same thing. He doesn't need more tutors or better security or expensive toys. He needs someone to see him as more than a problem to be managed. Is that what you think I do? Vincent's voice had an edge now. Manage him like a problem. I think you love him but don't know how to show it in a way he can receive. I think you're so afraid of him becoming damaged that you're missing the fact that he's already hurting. And I think the walls you've built to protect him are the same walls that keep him isolated. The silence that followed was absolute. Gone too far. I knew I'd gone too far. But the words had needed saying. And I was apparently the only person in Vincent's orbit willing to say them. Vincent set his glass down with careful precision. You're either very brave or very foolish. Probably both. Something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. Gone before I could be sure. Marcus is lucky to have you. Marcus deserves to have more than just me. He has me. Then be present, I said quietly. Not just physically. Be someone he can talk to without feeling like he's being evaluated. Be his father, not his security director. Vincent looked at me for a long time. Then he walked to the door and opened it. We're done here. Left. It was only when I was back in my own room that I realized my hands were shaking. Dr. Sarah Chen started sessions with Marcus a week later. Robert's vetting had apparently satisfied Vincent, though I never learned what that process involved. I suspected it was thorough and invasive and probably terrifying for Dr. Chen, but she took it in stride. She was in her 40s, calm and unflappable, with a way of making even difficult conversations feel safe. Marcus liked her immediately. I could tell by the way he talked about their sessions, not with the resistance he'd shown Dr. Morrison, but with cautious optimism. She didn't push him to remember things. She helped him process what he felt now. She gave him tools for managing anger instead of just analyzing where it came from. The improvement was gradual but visible. Marcus smiled more. The explosive episodes became less frequent. He started sleeping better. Vincent noticed, though he said nothing directly. But I saw the way he watched his son, the subtle relaxation in his shoulders when Marcus laughed at something during dinner. I'd been in my new role for 6 weeks when Vincent asked me to accompany him to a business meeting. It wasn't really a request, more of an instruction delivered through Robert. I was to be ready at 7 p.m. formal attire. No questions, I dressed in a black dress from the collection Sophia had provided, simple but elegant. I left my hair down and wore minimal jewelry. When I met Vincent in the foyer, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. You look acceptable, he said. I'll try to contain my excitement over that ringing endorsement. The corner of his mouth twitched. Almost a smile. The car is waiting. The meeting was at a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign. The entrance was an unmarked door between two boutiques. Inside, it was all dim lighting and velvet booths and waiters who moved like ghosts. Vincent led me to a private room in the back. 3 men were already seated. They stood when we entered, their eyes sliding over me with assessment and something darker. Vincent didn't introduce me. He simply pulled out a chair and waited for me to sit before taking his own seat. Gentlemen, he said. Thank you for coming. The meeting was ostensibly about a real estate deal. Warehouses near the waterfront. Zoning issues. Investment percentages. But I quickly understood the real subject was territory. These men were negotiating who controlled what. The warehouses were just the visible piece. I stayed quiet, observing. One of the men, older, gray-haired with cold eyes, kept looking at me. Finally he spoke. "Who's this, Vincent?" "New assistant. Someone who's none of your concern, Robert. You bring an unknown woman to a private meeting and expect us to just accept that." Robert's voice had an edge. "For all we know, she's recording everything." Vincent's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room dropped. "If you're uncomfortable, Robert, you're welcome to leave. But question my judgment again, and you'll find this relationship becomes significantly less profitable for you." Robert held Vincent's stare for exactly 3 seconds. Then he looked away. "Just asking questions." The meeting continued. I realized I'd been brought as a test, not for me but for them. Vincent was demonstrating his control by introducing an unexpected variable and watching how they responded. It was psychological warfare disguised as business negotiation. When we left 2 hours later, Vincent was silent in the car. I waited until we were halfway home before speaking. "You used me to intimidate them." "Yes. Without warning me. Would you have preferred advance notice?" "Thought about it. No. I probably would have been more nervous if I'd known." "Exactly." Vincent looked at me. "You did well. You didn't speak unless spoken to. You didn't show discomfort. You gave them nothing to leverage." "Was that the point? Making me unreadable?" "The point was demonstrating that I make decisions without needing their approval. Your presence accomplished that." I should have been angry. I should have felt used. But I was starting to understand how Vincent's world worked. Everything was strategy. Everyone was a piece on the board. And I'd just been promoted from pawn to something more significant. The realization hit me gradually over the following weeks. I wasn't just Marcus's caretaker. I was Vincent's statement. By keeping me close, by bringing me to meetings, by including me in his household in a way that went beyond staff, he was telling everyone in his orbit that I mattered. That touching me would have consequences. It should have felt empowering. Instead, it felt like being marked. The threats came subtly at first. A car that followed me when I took Marcus to his therapy sessions. A package delivered to the penthouse with no return address. Opened by security to reveal nothing but shredded paper. Phone calls where no one spoke, just breathing on the other end. Vincent's response was immediate and total. Security doubled. My movements became even more restricted. Thomas shadowed me everywhere, professional and silent. I wasn't allowed to go anywhere without advance clearance. "This is temporary," Vincent assured me during one of our increasingly frequent evening meetings in his study. "Robert is testing boundaries. He's trying to find weakness. And I'm the weakness. You're the unknown variable. That makes people nervous. So what happens when they decide I'm too much of a liability?" Vincent's expression hardened. "They don't get to make that decision." But the escalation continued. One night, Marcus's bedroom window was shattered by a brick. No one was hurt. Marcus had been downstairs having dinner, but the message was clear. Vincent's protection had limits. His world could be penetrated. I found Vincent in his study afterward, staring at security footage with Robert. The brick had been thrown from a neighboring building, the thrower's face obscured by a hood. Professional. Deliberate. A warning. "This is because of me," I said from the doorway. Vincent didn't turn around. "This is because of Robert's greed and stupidity. If I left, you're not leaving." His voice cut through the room like a blade. "That's exactly what he wants. To prove that I can be pressured through the people I protect. If you leave, it validates his strategy. If you stay, he has to face consequences." "What consequences?" Vincent looked at me finally. His gray eyes were cold, empty of everything except purpose. The kind that ensures he never makes this mistake again. I understood what he meant. I should have been horrified. Should have argued that violence begot violence, that there were better ways. But I looked at the shattered window, thought about Marcus's terrified face, and found I had no moral high ground to stand on. "When?" I asked. Tomorrow night. Vincent's gaze sharpened. I want you to understand something. What I'm about to do is not justice. It's not righteousness. It's power maintaining itself. If that makes you uncomfortable, if you can't live with being adjacent to it, tell me now. I thought about the choices that had led me here. The broken arm. The medical suite. The decision to stay. Every step had been leading to this moment. The point where I had to decide whether I could exist in Vincent's world knowing what it cost. Will innocent people be hurt? I asked. No. Will it stop the threats against Marcus? Yes. He nodded. Then I can live with it. Vincent didn't tell me details, but I read about it in the news 2 days later. A warehouse fire. Robert and 2 of his associates, killed in what investigators were calling an industrial accident. Accelerant patterns suggested arson, but no suspects, no witnesses, no evidence. I sat in the breakfast room with a newspaper spread in front of me, coffee cooling in my cup. Maria was cleaning quietly in the kitchen. Marcus was with Dr. Chen. The penthouse was peaceful, sunlight streaming through the windows. The city spread out below like a promise. 3 men were dead because they'd threatened a child and the woman caring for him. Vincent had made it look like an accident. Clean. Efficient. Untraceable. I should have felt sick. Should have questioned every choice that had led me here. But all I felt was relief. The threats would stop. Marcus would be safe. And I was complicit in violence I'd never witnessed but had tacitly approved. Vincent found me still sitting there an hour later. He poured himself coffee and sat across from me, saying nothing. We stayed like that for several minutes, the newspaper between us, evidence of what he'd done printed in neat columns. Are you waiting for me to thank you? I asked finally. No. But because I won't. I don't expect you to. Vincent took a sip of coffee. But I need to know you understand what staying here means. This won't be the last time. There will always be someone testing boundaries, looking for weakness, trying to take what's mine. Protection requires vigilance. And sometimes, vigilance requires violence. I understand. Do you? He set his cup down. Because understanding and accepting are different things. You can understand the necessity intellectually while finding it morally repugnant. I need to know where you stand. I thought about Marcus, about the brick through his window, about the car that had followed us. I thought about the life I'd had before. The constant fear, the precarious existence, the knowledge that no one was protecting me from anything. I stand here, I said quietly. In your world. With your son. Knowing what it costs and choosing to stay anyway. Vincent studied me for a long moment. You've changed. So have you. Have I? You asked my opinion before acting. You waited to see if I could live with the consequences before proceeding. The Vincent I met 2 months ago wouldn't have done that. The Vincent you met 2 months ago didn't have Marcus breaking mirrors or you challenging his authority in his own study. Something that might have been warmth flickered in his eyes. You've made this household complicated. Good, I said. Complicated means alive. Simple means dead inside. Life developed a new rhythm after that. I understood my place now. Not just in the household but in Vincent's strategy. I was the humanizing element. The proof that he was more than the violence his world required. I managed the staff, coordinated Marcus's schedule, and ensured the household ran smoothly. But more than that, I was the person Marcus talked to when he couldn't talk to his father. The person who made family dinners feel less like business meetings and more like actual connection. Vincent and I developed something that wasn't quite friendship but wasn't purely professional either. We had evening meetings in his study where we discussed Marcus's progress, household logistics, sometimes nothing at all. We sat in comfortable silence, him working through files while I read. The quiet intimacy of 2 people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. Marcus thrived. Dr. Chen's therapy was working. He still had hard days, moments when the anger surged up and he had to use the techniques she taught him to manage it. But the violence was gone. He'd learned he didn't have to break things, including people, to express pain. 3 months into my role as head of household, Vincent called me to his study. It was late past midnight. I'd been reading in my room when Thomas knocked and said Mr. Corrigan requested my presence. I found Vincent standing by the window, whiskey in hand, looking out at the city. He didn't turn when I entered. Marcus told me today that he considers you family, he said quietly. I waited. He said you're the only person who's ever stayed when things got hard. That you see him as more than his worst moments. Vincent finally turned to face me. He's right. You do. Is that a problem? No. Vincent set his glass down. It's the first time he's trusted anyone enough to use that word. Family. Do you understand what that means in my world? That it makes me a target. That it makes you protected. He crossed the room until he was standing in front of me. Close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. Family means untouchable. Means anyone who threatens you threatens him. And therefore threatens me. Vincent, I'm not finished. His voice was quiet but intense. You've given Marcus something I couldn't give him, the belief that people stay. That care isn't transactional. That he's worth the difficulty of loving him. You've done that without asking for anything in return. Without leveraging your position or demanding special treatment. You've simply stayed. Course I stayed. I told him I would. And that, Vincent said softly, is why you matter. Not because you're useful. Not because you manage the household efficiently. But because you keep promises to a child who's been taught promises are lies. I didn't know what to say. The air between us felt charged, heavy with something I couldn't name. I need to ask you something, Vincent continued. And I need you to be honest. Always. Are you happy here? The question caught me off guard. No one had asked me that. Not once in 3 months had anyone inquired whether I was content, satisfied, thriving. They'd asked if I was comfortable, if I needed anything, if the arrangements were acceptable. But happy? I don't know, I admitted. Happy feels like the wrong word. Purposeful. Needed. I mattered to Marcus. But happy? I shook my head. I don't know if I remember what that feels like. Vincent reached out and touched my face. His fingers gentle against my cheek. The gesture was so unexpected, so intimate that I froze. Then we'll figure it out together, he said quietly. The next morning everything looked different. Or maybe I was seeing clearly for the first time. Vincent at breakfast with Marcus. The careful way he listened to his son's chatter about astronomy. The small smile when Marcus successfully used one of Dr. Chen's techniques to redirect his frustration. The way his eyes found mine across the table, checking if I'd noticed, sharing the moment we were building something. The three of us. Not a traditional family, that was too simple a word for what we were. But something that mattered. Something worth protecting. Thomas pulled me aside that afternoon. Boss wants to see you. Formal meeting. I found Vincent in his study with a woman I didn't recognize. She was in her 60s, impeccably dressed, carrying herself with the authority of someone who'd spent decades navigating dangerous spaces. Miss Reyes, Vincent said. This is Margaret Chen, attorney. She's here to discuss some legal arrangements. Margaret opened her briefcase and pulled out documents. Mr. Corrigan has asked me to establish a trust in your name. The principal amount is $2 million, held in secure accounts, accessible only by you. Additionally, there's a property deed, a brownstone in your name, no mortgage, no liens. I stared at her. I don't understand. Trust is insurance, Vincent said. If something happens to me, you'll have resources. The property is yours regardless. You're not trapped here by financial necessity. You stay because you choose to. Vincent, this is non-negotiable. His tone left no room for argument. You've made yourself essential to Marcus. That means I need to ensure you're protected. Not just physically but financially. You need to know you're not dependent on my goodwill or my continued existence. Margaret handed me the papers. Everything is legal and documented. The trust is irrevocable. The property is deeded in your name as of today. You don't have to sign anything, it's already done. I looked at Vincent. You just gave me $2 million and a house. I gave you independence, he corrected. The choice to stay here is now genuine. You're not staying because you have nowhere else to go. You're staying because you want to. Should have felt manipulative. Another way to control me, to bind me to this life. But I understood what he was actually doing. He was removing the power imbalance. Making me an equal rather than a dependent. Trusting that my choice to stay wouldn't change with financial security. Thank you, I said quietly. Margaret left after reviewing the documents with me. I sat across from Vincent, the papers spread between us, evidence of a transformation I hadn't seen coming. Why? He asked. Why give me this much power? Because power is only real when someone can choose to walk away and doesn't. Vincent leaned forward. You could leave tomorrow. Take the money, take the house, build a new life. But you won't. How do you know? 'Cause I've been watching you for 5 months. I know how you think. I know what matters to you. And I know you don't abandon people you care about. He was right. Even with financial security, even with a house waiting, I wouldn't leave Marcus. I wouldn't walk away from the strange, complicated family we'd built. Not because I was trapped, but because I'd chosen this. What happens now? I asked. Vincent smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. We keep going. One day at a time. Building something none of us expected but all of us need. 6 months into my role, Marcus had a breakthrough. He came home from a session with Dr. Chen and asked if we could talk. The 3 of us, him, me, and Vincent, in the living room. Formal. Important. Dr. Chen says I should tell you how I feel, Marcus began, his hands clasped in his lap. She says it's okay to be angry or sad or confused. Those feelings aren't dangerous. Vincent and I waited. I'm angry at Mom for leaving, Marcus continued. His voice steadier than I'd heard it. I don't remember her, but I'm angry anyway. 'Cause she should have stayed. Because it wasn't fair that she left me with. He stopped himself. With what? Vincent asked quietly. With all this. Marcus gestured vaguely. The security. The threats. The violence. I'm angry that she left me to grow up in this world instead of taking me somewhere normal. Vincent's expression didn't change, but I saw him absorb the words like blows. And I'm angry at you, Marcus said, looking at his father. Because you're so good at being scary that everyone's afraid of you, including me sometimes. And I don't want to be afraid of my own dad. I know, Vincent said. But I also love you, Marcus added quickly. And I know you love me even though you don't say it much. And I know you've been trying. The dinners. The therapy. Listening to Dr. Chen instead of just hiring someone else when I complained. That's trying. Tears were streaming down Marcus's face now, but his voice remained steady. Dr. Chen had taught him to feel his emotions without being overwhelmed by them. And Elena, Marcus turned to me. I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry I broke your arm and made your life complicated and dragged you into this mess. But I'm also really glad you're here. Because you make everything less scary. I reached over and took his hand. You make my life better, Marcus. Not complicated. Better. Even with the broken arm. Even with that. Marcus looked between us. Dr. Chen says we're a non-traditional family structure, but that's okay. That what matters is whether we're healthy, not whether we look like everyone else. Dr. Chen is right, Vincent said. He moved from his chair to sit on the floor next to Marcus, eye level with his son. I'm not good at this. The feelings part. Talking part. I'm better at threats and strategy and control. But you deserve better than that. You deserve a father who can do both. You're trying, Marcus said again. That's enough. Vincent pulled his son into a hug. I watched them, the feared Mafia boss holding his child, both of them crying quietly, and felt something settle in my chest. This was why I'd stayed. Not for the money or the security or the beautiful penthouse. For this. For moments when broken people held each other together. The threats never fully stopped. There would always be someone testing Vincent's boundaries, looking for weakness, trying to gain advantage. But they became manageable. Expected. Part of the landscape rather than constant crisis. I learned to navigate Vincent's world. The dinners with dangerous people. The coded conversations. The way violence and business intertwined so seamlessly it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. I learned to read the signs, when to speak and when to stay silent, when to question and when to trust. Marcus continued therapy with Dr. Chen. He started at a new school, one Vincent had carefully vetted, with small classes and teachers trained in trauma-informed education. He made a friend, just one, but it was a start. He joined the astronomy club. He smiled more. Vincent changed too. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, but I noticed. He had dinner with Marcus 3 times a week now, no work allowed. He attended Marcus's school events. He asked questions about feelings without looking like he'd swallowed glass. He was learning a different kind of strength, the kind that came from vulnerability rather than control. And me? I became something I'd never expected. Not just staff. Not just Marcus's caretaker. But a genuine part of their lives. Vincent's advisor. Marcus's advocate. The steady presence that kept their small, strange family from flying apart. One evening, a year after I'd first walked into Vincent's office with a broken arm, we were having dinner when Marcus asked a question. "Elena, do you ever think about leaving?" I looked at him, this child who'd changed everything. "Sometimes. When things are hard. When I'm tired or overwhelmed." "But you don't." "Well, I don't." "Why not?" I glanced at Vincent, who was watching me with those storm-gray eyes. "Because this is where I belong. With you. With your father. In this complicated, messy, sometimes scary life we've built together." Marcus smiled. "Good. Because if you left, I'd have to learn to cook, and we'd all starve." "You could learn," I said. "Or we could just keep you here forever," Vincent suggested. There was something in his voice. Warmth, humor, but also truth. He meant it. "Forever's a long time," I said. "Yes." Vincent agreed. "It is." Marcus looked between us, grinning. "You guys are weird." "Probably," I admitted. "But it's weird," Marcus decided. "The kind that works." He was right. We were weird. Broken pieces that didn't quite fit but somehow created something functional. A mafia boss learning to be vulnerable. A child learning he wasn't dangerous. A woman learning she didn't have to sacrifice herself to have value. None of us were fixed. We were just better at being broken together than we'd been alone. 2 years into my role, Vincent asked me to meet him on the rooftop. It was late spring, the city lights glittering below, the air warm with the promise of summer. "I've been thinking," he said when I joined him. "That's usually dangerous." He smiled. "Marcus is doing well. Better than I'd hoped. Dr. Chen says he's made exceptional progress." "Yes. He's remarkable. Because of you." Vincent turned to face me. "You gave him something I couldn't." "Safety. Consistency. The belief that people stay." "We've had this conversation before. And we'll have it again," Vincent said quietly. "Because you need to understand your importance here." "Marcus. To me." I looked out at the city, at the life I'd built in the shadow of Vincent's empire. "I know I matter to you both. You don't have to keep telling me." "Don't I?" Vincent moved closer. "You still flinch when I call you family. Like you're waiting for it to be revoked. Like this is temporary." He was right. Part of me still expected it to end. The other shoe to drop. The moment when I'd stop being useful and become disposable. "Old habits," I said. "Break them." Vincent's voice was firm but not harsh. "You're not disposable. You're not temporary. You're woven into our lives in a way that can't be undone. Marcus needs you. Need you. And this." He gestured at the penthouse, the city, everything. "This works because you're here. Even with all the complications. Especially with the complications." Vincent took my hand. "You make us better. You make me better. You challenge me. You refuse to let me hide behind power and control. You see through the mechanisms to the person underneath. And you stay anyway. I looked at our joined hands, at the man who'd terrified me once and now felt like home. Where else would I go? I asked quietly. Anywhere you want. You have the resources, the freedom, the choice. Then I choose here. With you. With Marcus. In this strange, complicated life we've built. Vincent pulled me closer. In the distance, sirens wailed, the constant soundtrack of the city. Below us, people lived their small, ordinary lives, unaware of the empires built above them. And on this rooftop, two broken people held each other and pretended they were whole. Thank you, Vincent said. For staying. For choosing us when you didn't have to. Thank you for giving me something worth staying for. We stood like that for a long time, the city breathing around us. When we finally went back inside, Marcus was asleep on the couch, an astronomy book open on his chest. Vincent carefully moved him to his bedroom while I tidied the living room. Domestic. Normal. Safe. Everything I'd never had and never thought I'd find in the world of a man like Vincent Corrigan. I touched my arm where the break had healed, leaving no visible scar. But the invisible scars were there, the ones that mattered. The fear that had driven me to hide the injury. The desperation that had made me vulnerable to Vincent's control. The loneliness that had made me grateful for any crumb of connection. All of it had led me here. To this penthouse. This family. This life that I wouldn't choose to break my arm again. Wouldn't wish that pain on anyone. But I couldn't regret where it had brought me. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best changes. Sometimes breaking is the only way to heal. Sometimes the most dangerous people offer the safest shelter. Vincent found me standing in the living room, lost in thought. Everything all right? Yes, I said. And meant it. Everything's exactly as it should be. He nodded, satisfied. We stood together in the quiet penthouse, two people who'd found each other through violence and pain and need, and somehow built something that looked like love. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't safe. But it was ours. And for the first time in my life, that was enough.